I was down in New Orleans right after Hurricane Katrina hit, and I had gone down there to cover it for Democracy Now! Excuse me. And I saw in the French Quarter on Bourbon Street a couple of New York City police officers, and being that I live in New York, I went up and struck up a conversation with them, and we were chatting on Bourbon Street in the French Quarter, and this unmarked car pulls up next to us, and three large men get out of it, and they have M4 assault rifles, wraparound sunglasses, baseball caps, some of them with goatees, and they come up to the police officers, and they say, "Where are the rest of the Blackwater guys?" And my ears sort of started to ring, and I didn't hear what they said because I couldn't believe that I was hearing that question, the rest of the Blackwater guys. And so they got back into their car and they whizzed away, and I said to the cops, "Blackwater, you mean like the guys over in Iraq and Afghanistan?" And they said, "Oh yeah, they're all over the place down here." And I said, "Well, where can I find them? I'd like to go and speak with them." And one cop smiled and he said, "You can go either way on this street." So I walked deeper down into the French Quarter, and sure enough, I found a group of Blackwater men congregating on a corner. And I struck up a conversation with them, and I asked them, "What are you doing down here?" They said, "We're here to help." I said, "Who sent you down here?" "Our boss." I said, "What's your mission down here?" "We're here to confront criminals and stop looters." And I started pressing them, under whose authority are you operating down here? Because we have a law in this country called Posse Comitatus, which bans the military from engaging in law enforcement. And it appeared to me as though this was militia-type activity. These are men that work for a private company, heavily armed on the streets of an American city when what was needed was aid, water, and food. I didn't see one FEMA person the entire time I was in New Orleans in the immediate aftermath of the hurricane. I saw one abandoned FEMA vehicle. And here I was talking to men who 2 weeks earlier had just been in Iraq, complaining to me that there wasn't enough action in New Orleans. Now, I don't know what a mercenary means when he says there's not enough action, but I can use my imagination. And so as we talked, I'm pressing them on under whose authority are you down here? And finally, when they realize that I'm not going to take no answer for an answer, one of them whips out from under his bulletproof vest a gold badge and says, "I was deputized by the governor of the state of Louisiana." And he used the word deputized. And he said, "We're authorized to use lethal force if we deem it necessary." I'm listening then as I'm talking to one of the guys to another man from Blackwater who's on his cell phone, and he's saying to someone on the other line, "You don't want to come down here and work for Blackwater. They're only paying $350 a day plus a per diem, $350 a day to be down in New Orleans." And as I talked to them more, and I'm going to return to that $350 a day in a second, as I talked to them more, I still wasn't buying the whole "I was deputized, I'm down here to help, I'm confronting criminals and stopping looters." And they told me they were protecting an art gallery somewhere in some wealthy guy's mansion. And then one of them mentioned something about the Department of Homeland Security. And I said, are you on contract with the Department of Homeland Security? And the guy says, "Oh, that's way above our pay grade." So I started to dig into it a bit, and it turns out that indeed they were. Blackwater was hired by the Department of Homeland Security's Federal Protective Service to engage in security operations to protect FEMA's activities in New Orleans. Now, I don't know if FEMA has arrived yet, but their mercenaries were certainly down there en masse. And when I got Blackwater's contracts for its New Orleans operations, it turns out that Blackwater billed U.S. taxpayers $950 per man per day. The guys said they were getting $350 a day plus a per diem. When the bill came into the taxpayers, it was $950 a day for their men down there. At one point, Blackwater had 600 operatives stretching from Texas through Mississippi and the Gulf. They were pulling in about $240,000 a day at a time when the poor residents of the Gulf were being chastised for breaking into food stores and taking perishable goods, when they were given non-functional debit cards from FEMA for $2,000 that wouldn't even work, when they were being systematically humiliated, families forced to take showers outside the convention center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, people displaced, put on airplanes, not told where they were going, when what was needed was a humanitarian relief operation. What the poor folks of the Gulf got was the politically connected mercenaries of Blackwater, USA. And it wasn't just Blackwater. It was like Baghdad on the bayou down there. It was as though the Iraq occupation had come home. The only thing missing was the Louisiana National Guard, which was somehow defending the state by occupying Iraq and Afghanistan. And so as we're down there, we're driving around, and it was guns, guns, guns. I didn't see any food distribution. The Red Cross didn't even enter New Orleans for the most part in the immediate aftermath. They were positioned on the outskirts of the city. And so we were driving around, and we saw these men dressed in black commando gear outside of this wealthy gated community. And inside that wealthy gated community lived a man named James Reese, who was a city official there. And he had just been waxing with the Wall Street Journal about how if the demographics in New Orleans didn't change, we, meaning the white community, are out of here. And so I saw the commandos patrolling outside of his gated community, and I went up and talked to them, and it turns out that they were former members of the Israeli Defense Force working for a company called Instinctive Shooting International. And they were operating a checkpoint on the streets of a U.S. city, not in the employ of the Department of Homeland Security, but of a man who was just making racist comments in the Wall Street Journal. And here they were on the streets of a U.S. city. And that scenario was repeated in places all throughout New Orleans, where the wealthy brought in their own hired thugs. I had another private security operator talk to me about how he shot up some people he described as black gangbangers on an overpass in the 9th Ward. Who's investigating the crimes of private forces in New Orleans? We've heard so many stories about unsolved deaths and missing people. And when the poor needed humanitarian supplies, what they got instead were the mercenary forces flown in by the government and by wealthy individuals.